There we go. So, welcome to another episode of the Clark-Smith podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Alexis Maule. Alexis, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. You've had quite the career from Harvard graduate through working with Michelle Obama as First Lady, investment banking into retail and e-commerce and US to Europe. So it's been quite a journey. For those that don't know you, perhaps you can give me a little bit of an introduction to yourself. Obviously, the main topic we'll be talking about today will be around those differences between entering into the US and or coming into Europe from the US and going vice versa, really. But yeah, give us a quick introduction to yourself.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, James, and thank you for taking the time. I'm excited to be here. I am originally from the US and am from Chicago originally, but through school and work have ended up living and working across the US. So Boston, New York, Seattle, parts of California, and actually landed in London via Milan when I went to work at UKE after business school, and have really enjoyed working internationally. I did start my career in finance and investment banking, but I have really developed a passion for the intersection of consumer and technology. And, that was started by getting my foot in the door at Stanford Business School and being exposed to Silicon Valley, and then the likes of Amazon, working in China and e-commerce, and then landing in Italy working for the CEO of UKE right before the acquisition of Net-a-Porter. So that's really where my career took off, and I've really enjoyed working and living abroad. I still have family in the US, and a lot of my work now actually is helping brands scale that are based here in UK and Europe to the US and vice versa. So I've really focused on that. And, I've been lucky enough to work anywhere from quite luxury and premium across the likes of, Net-a-Porter and Mr. Porter, to the likes of Reformation, focused on sustainability. So really passionate about sustainability, and then even going a bit more mass. So really my passion lies with, consumer and technology in whatever shape that is. But I do have a sweet spot, for luxury retail.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about your early career as well, because I think there's really interesting experiences that you had early on that I'd imagine shaped a lot of your perspectives as well. I mean, you started with psychology in Harvard as well. I did philosophy. I think psychology is something that everybody should be looking into. It's so fundamental to us as humans, obviously. But then, obviously, going to work for Michelle Obama. But that start with psychology. Why psychology?
Yeah, so funny enough, I think my family wanted me to do economics, and that's a huge major at Harvard. And I was on that track my first year, and I went to the first class, and there were over 1,000 people. The classes were huge, the breakout groups were huge. It wasn't personalized at all, and it just wasn't really an intimate learning experience. And so after the first year, I found my way into psychology and was fascinated and, really enjoyed kind of the smaller groups. At the time, William James, which is a psychology center at Harvard, they were focusing on, positive psychology and really that area of, I would say, self-improvement and sort of development. And it was a really exciting time to be studying psychology, but also, the focus that has really helped me in business in my later career, which is just understanding people, teams, sort of the softer side, so the EQ side of things, which has really served me to this day. So I really enjoyed it. I got to do lab work and enjoyed the courses, and also sort of even looked at the intersection of psychology and business and psychology and law, which I found very fascinating.
was going to say a lot of people I come across when they think of psychology, they think of therapy, but I mean, it's a real world application, in advertising, how are we triggering people and whether, as you say, EQ, leading teams, leading people, it's fundamental to us. And it sounds like you've taken some of those learnings and perspectives through your career as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in developing as a manager, as a leader, in recruitment, as you said, even in, consumer product design, and, thinking about why would someone buy this again? Why do they even need this? What's the use case? Who's your customer? All of these things really boil down to psychology. And so, yeah, it served me very well, and it's a major that I recommend. That being said, I will say that it is a liberal arts college, so you don't have the option of business or something
Mm.
very specific. So, out of the options that there were, kind of economics, social studies, psychology, that sort of thing, I think psychology was a good one.
But you still transitioned into investment banking.
Yeah, so I will say at the time, I always knew I wanted to do something a bit more creative.
Mm.
But when you're in that type of university, the recruiting and the type of companies that sort of come to recruit you, there's really two options. It's either investment banking or consulting. Those are the ones that are sort of really putting in a lot of effort to recruit students. And I didn't really understand it at the time, but I was glad that I did end up, doing an investment banking program because really it served to provide me with really hard skills around financial
Mm.
analysis, the commercial side of business. Business casing, presentation, client interaction. So all of those kind of skills I developed in an investment banking program. And I do think that the amount of resources and investment that these programs, because, there's some organizations with a lot more funds that they can really invest in the learning and professional development of people at the beginning of their career. So, yes, you do end up working very hard and putting in lots of hours to be there, but it is a great training ground for any think type of career down the line. And that's how I found it. It was sort of a period where I learned some of the most fundamental skill sets I had to, drive me towards a leadership position.
Absolutely. And you had another interesting training ground early on in your career. I know you did some fundraising for the Obamas, but you also got to work directly with Michelle Obama, the First Lady at the time, for a period. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so I think it was an amazing experience. I was a White House intern. I was in the First Lady's office working under the social secretary, and they do this really amazing program where they do bring interns in across all White House departments to really give them a first bird's eye view to not only learn and participate, but also to add value and support the teams. So it's a program that they run each quarter to really help give perspective on public service. And actually, for me, it was interesting because I had always had the view from the fundraising perspective, so not the real government structured view of how those positions worked. And in fundraising, it's very
Mm.
entrepreneurial. It's much more, it's all centered around sort of the big event of, the vote and that sort of thing and getting people out to vote, et cetera. But the White House is completely different in structure and really about thinking about your constituent groups, how you celebrate and welcome people across all of the US. And at a time when there was, it was a big historical achievement for that presidency. So it was a very exciting time. I think, you learned quite a few skills around diplomacy, around team building and really on what the inner workings is of the government. And so that was very important experience to learn sort of that side of a potential career. And I think it also kind of doubled down my desire to take that away, but then sort of go back and pursue something, creative that also had a business and more commercial background.
Absolutely. And it sounds like the early stages of your career were really about learning, building that experience portfolio, getting the fundamentals in place, whether it's Morgan Stanley, whether it's Credit Suisse, and then you went to do your MBA at Stanford as well. So really kind of, I suppose, building on the business experience and learning alongside some of the fundamentals. Was that the
Yeah,
case?
exactly. And even that experience, I mean, I was quite open, quite curious, and I was really trying to figure out how to one, what is my skill set? How to leverage that skill set in a work environment, and really kind of testing to see where I would be the best fit, where I could flourish, and where I could kind of combine these interests I had around, more creativity, arts, and I would say sort of the art of consumer and customer centricity, but then also the business side, the business development side, the analytical side. I had all these things that I enjoyed doing, but I was, fighting to figure them out in what role that would look like, what kind of company, what kind of industry. And as someone who's just graduated from university, the world is a bit your oyster. So everything sounds interesting, but until you try and actually go to work and actually apply your skills, you don't know sort of what's going to stick and what's going to make it to the long term. So I would say it was definitely an experiential time in my life, and one where I was, figuring out which was the right path for me.
What took you down the path of fashion, luxury, consumer, sort of e-commerce? Because that was the next step afterwards, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing that changed was, I did get into investment banking. That was a very hard knock camp for, tough skills. And I knew that I liked business, but I wasn't going to do it for the rest of my life. And I was actually going to be going to business school in New York and continue in that sort of regional area of the East Coast. But I was lucky enough to get accepted to Stanford Business School, and that completely changed my life because I was, locationally in California and at the doorstep of Silicon Valley. So, all of the access to, well, it was Facebook, but Meta at the
Mhm.
time, the big campuses of LinkedIn, of Google, of all of these tech companies just taking off. It was really exciting and exhilarating for me. And I knew that, I wanted to go in that direction. And the great thing about business school is that it gives you sort of, you have days where you can go try different industries. You also do trips. And actually, one of the trips that I took was a luxury retail trek to
Mm.
Italy. It was over the Thanksgiving period, and we visited a host of companies from Gucci, from Zegna, and then we also visited a company called Yoox. And I remember when I went there, I was very impressed that, I saw, people who had excelled in their careers, also quite a few people from business school. It seemed really exciting. And so I took a note of that. And actually, that is how I got my first job out of business school. They had my resume from that trip, and sort of, I guess the rest was history, but it was from that kind of being open and looking at different sectors.
Fantastic. And it does seem like that's quite a defining period in your career, I suppose, sort of after business school, Ukes and then later Reformation accelerated your career to the next level. It was almost like the learning phase is done. Now let's put it into practice and see where this goes. Is that a good description?
Yeah, it was funny. I did a lot of career life visioning in business school, and I think where I landed with my career life coach was that I wanted to be a chief of staff. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do my own company or if I wanted to kind of become an executive at a company. But we landed at that it would be a good experience to be a chief of staff, similar to Sheryl Sandberg, and her career. And so, it was me and about 10 other people who had resumes like mine looking to get those positions in California. And sort of by taking a different route, I never thought I would be working full time in Italy or outside of the US. I was actually focused on New York and California. I ended up, getting the opportunity to work for the CEO and founder of Ukes and then Ukes Net-a-Porter, and essentially taking on that role of chief of staff, which is exactly sort of what I was after. And so I just loved the role. I loved the company. It was in a time of super high growth, and Ukes merging with Net-a-Porter, and then Richemont acquired us. So a lot of change. It was very fast paced. It was very entrepreneurial. So I feel very lucky that I had that experience and was really able to grow with the company and add value in that way.
Absolutely. And two follow-up questions on that. So one, I want to learn a little bit more about working for that founder. I've heard people describe it as a real life MBA because you're working with the entrepreneur. But going back to your psychology background, managing through change whether it's acquiring businesses or working for the entrepreneur, the founder of the business. What's that like? As that chief of staff, because it's a role that's coming back in vogue as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a critical role, but one, I had a background of understanding entrepreneurs because my mom is an entrepreneur. So I grew up having an entrepreneur in my household, and I always understood that the dynamic when it's your own company is completely different. And it's
Mm,
almost like the extension of, your firstborn, your first child. And so things that may be not as serious or not as, um, I would say, significant to the average employee, it's a completely different level of seriousness and stress and kind of focus that a founder will bring to the dynamic. And so I was very much aware of that and I understood that. So for me, my role was really to help deliver. And as someone who came completely independently, from the US, but I was neither sort of Ukes nor Net-a-Porter in background. My role was really to, or as I saw it, to be neutral, to bring people together, and to really help to drive business outcomes and be someone who really brought people together, to get things across the line versus to be on one side or the other. And I think with any merger, there's a huge adjustment
mm,
culturally. Everyone is used to doing things the way they were done before for XY reasons. Things can change dramatically from being a private company to being a listed company, how often you report, how you view expenses and costs, all of these things, culture, what areas you invest in professional development, and people are very sensitive to
mm,
them. And these things are very sensitive and I would say unique by country and
mm.
um, by area. So and by area within the company, whether you're talking about the warehouse to the corporate offices. So there are a lot of dynamics you have to take in mind, and I think it's really a lot of communication, bringing people along the journey, and really trying to bring people together and do what's best for the company versus any given side.
Did you see a lot of differences in terms of culturally between US and some of the European countries, UK, that you were dealing with? And
Oh, yeah,
how did
absolutely.
you get up to speed with them and work your way through them? Because the speed of getting there is critical to being successful, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the US, I mean, I came from working in New York, investment banking, Silicon Valley, and the value system in other countries is completely different than the US. So you have a value system, you can have in a country where it's all focused on quality of life, let's say. The currency is not how much you make, how much you accomplish, KPIs. It's, people want to have a good quality of life, and the systems are set up that way. Or I would say, other countries like UK, it can be very balanced. But, even from a US perspective, it's a place where people are not used to having many holidays. They're used to working all the time, and doing anything possible to get deals done. So there's always that cultural difference in, how people, what people think about their colleagues across the pond and vice versa. And, I think even though, let's say, UK to US, we all speak English in a way, it's the cultural differences can be very nuanced. So
Mm.
I would say, I had to adapt my style absolutely in both countries. And even when we were doing deals in Middle East and China, you do have to be very flexible and adaptable. You have to be really strong with communications and making sure the messages are getting out there in the right way, and you have to bring people along. But I think the other thing, though, is, having really, I think, part of the business like Ukes was really strong in digital. It was always a digital engine, the operations and driving that forward. They also had a big part of the business that was B2B and drove e-commerce for lots of brands that was very successful. Net-a-Porter and Mr. Porter were very strong with content and
Mm.
editorial and beautiful products, all luxury, but it was a kind of a beautiful ecosystem in that you had the full price, the off price, the B2B. And at the time, it was a really innovative business model that was really sort of first in its class and leading the change. Things have changed, unfortunately, in recent history, but at the time it was super exciting. We were on the forefront of many things, and it was exciting to be a part of it.
Mm. And talking about those cultural differences brings us nicely on to your time with Reformation, bringing the brand from North America into Europe and sort of globally. And at a time when COVID had kind of gone through, but we still had some disruption as well. Talk me through that period of life as well, because I think that's a
Yeah,
fascinating
well, the
time.
good thing is people love the brand, and I think when you
Mm.
think of bringing a brand like that into UK and Europe, there's so many things that go into it and that need to be thought through. So it's definitely not a copy and paste exercise, but everywhere from, what is the best way to enter in wholesale? In that case, it was Selfridges to really get into the market, but maybe, obviously at the time that wasn't Harrods, but that was an intentional selection in terms of resonating with a certain type of consumer. When you think about the product line, so, a brand from California, but here, we need longer dresses and sweaters and boots and coats, and it's those sweaters were just like go selling off the shelves
Mm.
because what you would put in a merchandising perspective here, and let's say Nordic countries and other areas, is very different than what you might have in parts of the US. So you have to think that through. And even what you would call these items, so jumpers, not actual sweaters or sneakers, that type of thing, even the language can be different. So you really have to think about the full localization and finding that customer who is here. How do you really connect with the customer, bring them in? And what I love about UK and Europe is that the focus here on sustainability is
Mm.
so strong and resonates with so many people that, it was a much stronger attachment to the brand than I would say you would get in the US market. And it really did help make it resonate, and people really connect with the brand. And then
Mm.
I think also having the digital enabled stores, and the magic wardrobes, very unique aspects of the clienteling and the physical retail. But for me, it was just a fantastic opportunity to have that full omni-channel experience, which I really do believe in. So, the cross section of wholesale, of digital and physical retail, which you don't get from a digitally first platform like YNAB or
Mm,
Farfetch. Well, Farfetch has the store of the future, but in general, the more a bit more integration of physical retail, I think, is
yeah.
really important.
Couple of follow-up questions on that. First, around sustainability, and then the future of it as well, because I think that's a really fascinating point. Brick and mortar versus the digital space, and how attitudes are changing and evolving. But on the sustainability front, it seems like we went through a period of time when sustainability seemed to be, the buzzword. It was on everyone's mind, but almost it seems to have waned a little bit, and maybe people have become suspicious around greenwashing, and more aware that actually it's not what it says it is on the packaging, as it were. Is that been your experience? Because
Well, a few things. So, I mean, it's been great in the recent past to have France really leading the charge and to have so much support, or I would say a deal of support for sustainability for UK and European countries. And I think having that focus on legislation, of really pushing companies to show sort of their commitments to ESG, especially if they're listed, and to provide more details on where they're sourcing carbon emissions. I think that's fantastic. It does provide a lot of work, and I think that's the other piece, that when you are adhering to more sustainable practices, it's at a cost,
mm,
right? So, we see a lot of the fast fashion really hasn't had to bear the brunt of that cost. They've actually benefited from being on the lower end of the pricing scheme, but pushing to sort of put sort of taxes on materials that are made in an unsustainable way, that sort of thing, I think is really important, because it is, unsustainable to keep producing so much material and waste at the pace that we are. So I think it's been going in the right direction now with recent world events. I think the US was always behind in all of this to begin with. They started to come along, but obviously with this administration, everything has kind of turned on its head recently. And I think everyone is trying to figure out, what's what. And
mm.
so, with sustainability, with DE&I, et cetera, a lot of things have been questioned. And now with tariffs, where you are sourcing has been questioned. But I think, it actually may cause more brands to have to be more lean and focus more on a sustainable supply chain,
Mm.
because the places they were sourcing before, might now increase in price significantly. So,
And do you think with that, because I know with sustainability, things can get buried in sort of tier two, tier three type supplier relationships, not the direct or sort of more indirect sort of suppliers. And with changes, like you say, at a government level in the US, do you think that's going to put more or require the businesses to take more ownership of what does that mean for us, and we're going to plow our path rather than as happening more in Europe, where it's more of a legislative agenda, because even having a two-speed business across the globe is going to be difficult and probably cumbersome, and create,
yeah,
internal
no, it's a
difficulties.
good point. And as you say, it has been more legislative from the UK and European side. But on the US side, I think it all depends on who the consumer is that brands are targeting and their value system. So when you
Mm,
really think about who is your consumer, in some areas, sustainability is really important. More and more areas of the US, more consumers are becoming conscious of it. Is it to the point where companies are making very big changes? I think in some cases, I don't think it's an overwhelming majority. I do see more and more brands that have launched in the recent years be much more mindful of it and
Mm.
integrate sustainability in the design, materials, and supply chain from the beginning. But it is a bit harder once you kind of retroactively do it. So I do think it's something that now most people are discussing, and it will come up in executive boardrooms and sort of the decision to be made of how much of a priority it is. But I think, in the next few months and year two, we'll see to what extent, it impacts the production in the US and how things are made and designed.
Yeah. And just following up on that, I know diversity, DEI has been a core principle for you and something you've championed as well. When you have a government that's almost sort of saying, "Don't worry about that, that's in the past," does that have an impact on business as well, and how they see the way forward from your perspective?
Well, yeah, I think it absolutely does. And I think, there's only so many dollars. People have budgets, and um, it has had implications of where companies are focusing their efforts and their outreach and their sort of development for employees. And what I do believe in the advantages of having people of all backgrounds. It's not just about sort of your ethnic race, but it could be having diverse mindset,
Mm,
people from different countries, people from different backgrounds coming together. And I think having that sort of diversity of thought and background is important, and there have been many studies to show the business implications and the upside from that. That being said, I think it's been super heartwarming. What I've at least taken away are the companies who, in light of what's been said from the government, have said, actually, we've reviewed and actually
mm,
we've looked at our customers, and this is something that remains important to us, and something that we're going to stick by. So there have been some companies that have done that, or I think in some cases it was time to maybe revisit policies to be more updated. Because, if you look at it, in different ways, not just from these sort of old policies, maybe it should be based more on socioeconomic
mm.
background and people without access to resources. And even in that light, you're still going to get shift through quite a bit of diversity that way. So I think it's how to make equity a bit more fit for purpose and for the changing dynamic of the landscape.
Yeah, it takes us nicely on to, I suppose, your move from operator to advising businesses now in terms of that transition as well. And I, I called it, or I described it to someone the other day as moving from the person that has the conviction of this is the path that we go to the person that's almost trying to make sure that there are, people can see their blind spots and bringing in different perspectives. I mean, it goes with that idea of having different voices and thoughts and backgrounds around the table can help shape the right strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's been fascinating for me and something that I don't take for granted, but it's been a real opportunity, is that, I have in my past worked with companies of certain scales, let's say 350 million above 1 billion, 3 billion, and even before that, much bigger. But, the impact that you can make on leveraging that kind of background and working with 1 to 50 million, but really my sweet spot has been, from 10 to 50, that, the amount of impact you can make and things you can really help with is really quite endearing and significant. And so what I found is that, what was kind of just business as usual, maybe in a bigger company, things that have been learned, ways of working, processes, scaling, etc., can be quite valuable for companies that are, in this, under 100 million,
Mm.
looking to scale, entering markets for the first time. So it's been very rewarding. It's also been rewarding to, work with different sectors adjacent to sort of ready to wear and that sort
Mm.
of thing, not just sort of luxury clothes and accessories, but looking at beauty at home, at, wellness, and all of the sectors that are really adjacent. I think in spending a bit more time there has been really rewarding as well.
I mean, I've always said that innovation comes from bringing two different ideas together. Take the iPhone as an example, took a computer and a phone and put them into one. Having that experience across different markets can help bring different ideas together in terms of how they evolve and develop. Brings us nicely back to our earlier point about the future of retail and e-commerce. Now, you get to see lots of different organizations at the moment. What sort of trends are you seeing coming out in the
Well, of
future?
course, everyone's talking about AI, but I think for consumer, it's an exciting time in that, there needed to be much more of a push on automation of sort of applying technology and data analysis and really integrating that into the way of working because, it was just unsustainable to have so many people working manually. And so I think continuing that push and that business case for more AI in processes, in data analysis, in even supply chain and is really important. So I think that's really come to the forefront. I do think, for the future now, with a little bit of volatility coming from the US, the questions around sustainability and ESG are still very much a part of the future
Mm,
because we know that it is unsustainable for the planet to continue to produce and dump the way um, that we have in the past. So there has to be change around that. And I think we've seen that start to happen with a lot of gains across circularity and resale and secondhand. All of these markets have really, even rental, have become not just on trend, but they've become part of a circular business
mm,
model that most brands and platforms did not focus on before. So I really think that's another focus. And then I think the third one would be just the continuous um, more to your point about the intersection and collaboration
mm,
of sectors. So not just going to, a consumer product going to purchase something, but the experience, the
mm,
curation, the really making exceptional sort of customer centric approaches to brands and how you invite someone into your brand, get to know the brand and make it not just about that purchase, but make it much more of an experiential
mm,
type of environment and one that crosses potential travel, culture, whether it's music. I see a lot of the future as the intersection of many industries and not just
mm.
one.
Absolutely. It's something that has been talked about for a while, certainly in terms of brick and mortar, that the in-store experience needs to change to become more of an experience rather than a place that has the stock, because the stock could be held
Exactly.
centrally and distributed more simply and more cost effectively as well. But actually about that experience. And I mean, it sounds like you were doing that anyway with Reformation, with the magic mirrors and the like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those are all great examples and sort of that experience of the future and making things more actually seamless because it's much nicer to go in a store and instead of having racks and racks of clothing just to have the key pieces and be able to pick out your size and have it come out for you versus, quite a, I would say, crowded floor. I mean, you have to be very particular about how you use every square foot and does it make sense to integrate a cafe or a different vendor or make it more of experience and do you have space for the people who have to come along with the people who are trying things on and what does that look like so it's there's a lot of creativity that goes into it and I think more and more especially the department stores, Printemps just opened in New York, and you see the likes of Selfridges, even Vista Village, really pushing on experiential design, and I think that definitely is the way of the future.
Absolutely. Do you see that changing? I'm talking specifically about UK here, high streets in that respect, and I suppose the curation of what that ecosystem looks like on a high street, because it's been very, Bicester Village is a purpose-built village where you've got a more of a captive audience coming in where you can curate that type of experience. But on a high street, it's different because it's different units and you don't get to curate that type of experience. So does that change how brands think about locations and what they're trying to
Yeah,
achieve?
absolutely. And I mean, there's a difference between a high footfall high street and one that's high football, but people are there not to transact, but
Mm,
more for sightseeing. I think there's a lot more factors, unfortunately, that go into sort of curating the high street that are out of the control of, one individual person. In some cases, I've seen there are a few high streets that have particular landlords that can help curate and have a bigger hand in sort of deciding, oh, we have too much of this category,
yeah.
let's try and go with a different type of brand, etc. So they kind of, but I mean, now, especially in the UK with taxes on storefronts and so many things, I think it's also who can afford to be there. And who can afford to stay open. So it really depends. And unfortunately, it's not very consistent.
Yeah. Final question, because we could talk for hours on this. Do you think that you mentioned it just there, the tax regime is putting off brands from thinking UK as a launch point into Europe? They're rethinking how they're going to expand into Europe. It used to be US to UK because of the language. But do you think that's those sort of taxes, whether it's business rates, etc., is putting off brands now?
I think, unfortunately, so many things have been done in the last few years, and so many changes have been made that have suppressed consumer demand in the UK. And I absolutely do think that it's made other countries much more attractive when it comes to retail and consumer. So the factors I look at, Brexit making the cost of shipping much more expensive, the business rates, like you mentioned, people pay almost rent and then a half on
Mm,
taxes to have a storefront here, and those are, the numbers on that are going to increase because there's not going to be as many credits anymore from COVID. You have the lack of tax-free shopping, so tourists are now coming to the UK to sightsee, then taking the Eurostar and doing their shopping in the likes of Paris and in Spain and Italy. They've all sort of benefited. I mean, there have been billions of dollars lost or pounds lost here in the
mm,
UK because of that. So absolutely, and I think there need to be some measures taken to really focus on showing the benefit of consumer in the UK so that there are more steps taken to address it.
no, absolutely, absolutely. Alexis, Absolutely fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. We could sit here for hours talking further, but I really appreciate you taking the
No,
time to
thank
speak
you.
with
It was
me. Enlightening, and we'll take you in the video so people can reach out to you and find you if they want some advice, support, or thinking about how to expand their business. But thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day, and I really appreciate being here.
Thank you.